The telephone receiver felt slick in General Gotthard Heinrichi's palm. 2:40 in the morning, April 16, 1945. The bunker near Silo Heights smelled of concrete dust and stale cigarette smoke. His staff officers crowded closer, watching his face in the weak lamplight. The voice on the line belonged to a forward observation officer, and it was shaking. "How many guns?" Heinrichi asked. He kept his voice level, professional. A pause. Static crackled. "We count." "We're still counting, Herr General. At least 20,000. Perhaps more." Heinrichi's adjutant, Major Kleber, leaned in. 20,000 what, sir?" Heinrichi didn't answer. He was doing mathematics that seemed impossible. 20,000 artillery pieces. Germany's entire Eastern Front possessed maybe 3,000 guns total. This single Soviet concentration. "What else?" Heinrichi said into the receiver. "Searchlights. Hundreds of them. We think, Herr General, we think they're going to illuminate the battlefield. Use them to blind us when the attack comes." Of course they were. The Soviets could afford such extravagance. They could afford anything. Heinrichi set the receiver down gently, precisely. His officers waited. "Wake everyone," he said. "Full alert. It begins at dawn." They scattered to their posts. Heinrichi remained at the map table, staring at the dispositions marked in grease pencil, thin red lines representing his forces. He'd done everything possible, pulled back from forward positions, prepared secondary defenses, conserved ammunition. It wouldn't matter. 20,000 guns. The number kept recurring in his mind like a stuck clock. Germany's entire industrial capacity couldn't produce 20,000 guns. Not in a year. Maybe not in 2 years. The Soviets had assembled them for a single offensive, on a single front, for a battle that would last, what, a week? 2? At 3:00 a.m., the eastern horizon caught fire. Not dawn. Something else. Artificial daylight that turned night into noon. 143 searchlight beams stabbing westward, each one powerful enough to illuminate a bomber formation at 10,000 meters, now aimed horizontally to burn out the retinas of anyone foolish enough to look east. Then the sound arrived. Heinrichi had survived 4 years on the Eastern Front. He knew artillery. He'd endured barrages at Rzhev, at Smolensk, at Orsha. He understood what massed guns sounded like. This was different. Not individual explosions, but one continuous roar, an avalanche of sound that made the bunker's concrete walls vibrate. The light bulb overhead swayed on its cord. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The noise didn't have peaks and valleys. It was a single sustained note, like standing inside a church bell while it rang. 25,000 artillery pieces firing simultaneously. Kleber returned, face white. "Sir, the forward positions." "Gone," Heinrichi said. "Sir? They're gone. Whatever was in the impact zone is gone." The barrage continued. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3. The sound never diminished, never paused. Mathematics made audible. Soviet factories running 3 shifts, ammunition trains stretching back to the Urals, American Lend-Lease trucks carrying shells forward faster than German guns could fire them. Heinrichi thought of the briefings he'd attended in Berlin, the confident assertions that Soviet-Western cooperation was fragile, that the alliance would fracture, that American supplies were propaganda exaggerations. He thought of Goebbels' miracle weapons, of wonder jets that never arrived, of tank divisions that existed only on paper. The concrete beneath his feet trembled. Not from nearby impacts, from the cumulative effect of thousands of tons of high explosive churning the earth 200 kilometers away. In Switzerland, seismograph needles jumped. Scientists would later debate whether to classify it as an earthquake or merely unprecedented bombardment. The readings looked identical. At 7:00 a.m., silence. The absence of sound felt physical, pressure against the eardrums. Heinrichi's ears rang. His officers looked dazed, shell-shocked despite being safely underground. "Get me forward observation," Heinrici said. It took 20 minutes to establish contact. The radio operator's voice sounded distant, dreamlike. Herr General? There's nothing left. Lieutenant Ernst Fischer didn't remember the impact that collapsed his bunker. One moment he'd been crouched against the wall, hands pressed over his ears, mouth open to equalize pressure. The next moment, darkness and the taste of blood. He clawed upward through fallen timber and earth. His uniform was shredded. Something warm ran down his face, blood or sweat, he couldn't tell. His hands found air, then light. Fischer pulled himself out and stood. The world had ended. Every tree, gone. The forest that had concealed their positions for 3 weeks had been erased, transformed into splinters and pulp. The ground looked like photographs he'd seen of the moon. Craters overlapping craters. Earth churned 3 meters deep, a lunar landscape of raw brown soil. He tried to orient himself. The company command post had been 30 meters that direction. The machine gun nests had been. Nothing remained to mark positions. No buildings, no trees, no landmarks. Just churned earth under a gray sky. Fischer stumbled forward. His regiment, 800 men, had occupied this sector yesterday. The bombardment had lasted 4 hours. He walked for 20 minutes before finding the first evidence that humans had existed here. A helmet, German, half buried in a crater. Fischer picked it up. Heavy. Something inside. He turned it over. A jawbone, still attached to part of a skull. Scraps of flesh. The jaw still had teeth. Good teeth. Young teeth. Maybe 20 years old. Fischer held the helmet in both hands. Behind him, to the east, he heard the rumble of engines. Tanks. Thousands of tanks. The Soviets were coming. He set the helmet down carefully, almost reverently, and began walking west. Behind him, the barrage zone stretched for kilometers. The Soviets had fired. Estimates would later calculate more than 2.5 million shells in 4 hours. More ordnance than Germany's entire artillery arm possessed. Expended in a single morning, on a single objective, because Soviet factories could replace it all in a week. The mathematics were simple. Brutal. Undeniable. Fischer walked, leaving boot prints in churned earth, the only survivor of 800 men, the sole witness to arithmetic made flesh. Overhead, the sky filled with Soviet aircraft, Il-2 Sturmovix in formations of 50, 100, flying so low he could see the pilots' faces. They didn't even bother shooting at him. One man, stumbling through moonscape, wasn't worth the ammunition. The ground shook again. Not artillery this time, but tank treads. Hundreds of T-34s, rolling forward in waves, crushing anything that remained. Fischer kept walking. Behind him, Silo Heights, the last major defensive position before Berlin, ceased to exist as a military obstacle. The capital lay 60 kilometers west, undefended. Open. The arithmetic had spoken. Now came the consequences. The Reich Chancellery Garden had never looked more obscene. SS Brigadeführer Wilhelm Monke stood at attention in the April noon sun, watching groundskeepers rake gravel paths while artillery rumbled 15 kilometers away. The symmetry was perfect. The tulips, somehow still blooming, formed precise lines of red and gold. Beyond the garden wall, Berlin burned. Inside it, gardeners maintained geometry. Goebbels had briefed him an hour earlier. The Führer wished to award medals to Hitler Youth for outstanding acts of valor. Monke expected perhaps a dozen boys, maybe 16-year-olds drafted late. Teenagers, at least. The children filed in at 11:45. 12 boys. The oldest couldn't be more than 16. The youngest looked 12, maybe younger, baby fat still soft on his cheeks. His uniform jacket so oversized the cuffs covered his hands completely. One wore his father's helmet, the steel pot sliding down over his eyes every few seconds. He kept pushing it back up with both hands, trying to maintain military bearing while blind. They formed a crooked line, standing at attention, shoulders squared, chins up, playing soldier. Monka's stomach turned. Hitler emerged from the bunker entrance at noon exactly. Monka hadn't seen him in daylight for weeks. The shock was physical. The man shuffling across the gravel looked 90 years old. His left hand trembled continuously, clutched tight against his chest to hide the shaking. His right hand managed slightly better control, but when he raised it in half-hearted salute, the tremor was visible from 10 meters away. 56 years old. Moving like a grandfather dying of Parkinson's. The boys snapped to attention with parade ground precision. Hitler's face twitched into something approximating a smile. "My brave soldiers," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. An adjutant read citations. The oldest boy, Alfred Czech, 16, from Pankow, had destroyed a Soviet T-34 with a Panzerfaust 3 days prior, fired from 12 meters. The tank had exploded, killing its entire crew. Czech stood motionless as his citation was read, eyes fixed straight ahead, face expressionless. He looked like he hadn't slept since. The next boy, Peter, 14, had destroyed 2 tanks. Twin kills in a single afternoon. Ambush position in a bombed-out bakery. His citation included the detail that he'd held position for 4 hours afterward, waiting for more targets, even as Soviet infantry swept the block. His hands shook worse than Hitler's. Hitler moved down the line, pinning iron crosses to chests. The medals looked enormous against the boy's narrow frames. His fingers fumbled with each pin. On the third boy, he jabbed the pin through the fabric and into the child's chest. The boy didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, just stood perfectly still while Hitler's trembling fingers worked the clasp, a bead of blood spreading slowly across his shirt. The boy with the oversized helmet was 7th in line. When Hitler reached him, the helmet slipped down again, covering his eyes completely. The child's hands flew up automatically to push it back. Hitler stopped, stared at the boy, this child drowning in his father's equipment, and something crossed his face. Not quite recognition, more like a man seeing his reflection in a funhouse mirror and understanding for one instant what he'd become. Then the mask returned. Hitler patted the boy's cheek with his shaking right hand. Gentle. Almost tender. "Such courage," he whispered. The boy beamed. Pure joy radiating from a 12-year-old face that wouldn't see 13. Monka watched Hitler pin the medal, watched the Führer's hand shake so badly it took 3 attempts to work the clasp, watched the boy stand proud and still, medals gleaming on his chest, helmet sliding over his eyes again the moment Hitler moved on. The oldest boy, Alfred Czech, spoke up as Hitler finished the final presentation. "Mein Führer," his voice cracked mid-sentence, adolescent vocal cords betraying him. He swallowed, tried again. "When do we receive our resupply of Panzerfausts?" Hitler turned back. The entire garden went silent. Even the artillery seemed to pause. "Soon," Hitler said. His eyes were vacant, looking past Czech, past the garden, past everything. "Very soon." He patted Czech's cheek, the same gesture he'd given the younger boy, and shuffled back toward the bunker entrance. The tremor in his left hand had worsened. By the time he reached the concrete stairs, an SS guard had to steady his elbow. Monka heard the guard whisper to another as Hitler descended. "He's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet." The ceremony dissolved. Adjutants dismissed the boys with instructions to report to their Hitler Youth units. The children saluted, spun on their heels with parade ground precision, and marched out through the garden gate in formation. Monka stood alone in the tulips, listening to their boots fade. 3 days later, Monka reviewed casualty reports in his bunker office. The lists had grown so long they'd stopped using names, just unit designations and numbers. HJ Battalion 503, 47 casualties, 23 KIA. His adjutant provided details without being asked. The battalion had deployed to defensive positions in Neukölln on the night of April 20th. Soviet armor had overrun their lines at dawn on the 21st. Among the killed, Alfred Czech, Peter, the boy whose name Monka never learned, the one who'd bled silently while Hitler pinned his medal. 3 of the 12. The boy with the oversized helmet had survived, technically. Soviet infantry found him under a destroyed tank, both legs crushed below the knee, Panzerfaust still clutched in his hands. According to prisoner reports, a Soviet soldier pulled him from the wreckage, tourniqueted both legs with his own belt, and carried him 3 blocks to a field hospital. The Soviets saved him. After he'd killed their comrades. After everything. Monkey set down the casualty report and walked to his office window. Outside, the Chancellery Garden still maintained its geometry. The groundskeepers were gone now, conscripted or fled, but the tulips hadn't received the message. They kept blooming in perfect formation, red and gold against the smoke-dark sky. He thought of Hitler's vacant eyes, the trembling hand patting a child's cheek. Such courage. Such goddamned courage, throwing children against tanks because the arithmetic had finally come due and Germany had nothing left but medals and lies. The oldest boy had asked about Panzerfausts. Hitler had promised, soon. They'd arrived the next morning, crates of them, enough to arm every child in Berlin. The resupply was perfect. The children were dead. The concrete walls sweat. Drips echo in the map room. Irregular percussion against the steady wheeze of dying ventilation fans. Albert Speer stands in the doorway, letting his eyes adjust. The bulb overhead flickers, casting Hitler's shadow across maps that no longer matter. 23 meters of earth and concrete above them. The Reich Chancellery Garden somewhere beyond the ceiling, where 3 days ago Hitler pinned medals on children. Down here, the air tastes like diesel fumes and human bodies that haven't seen sunlight in weeks. Come in, Speer. Hitler doesn't look up from the maps. His left hand trembles against the table edge, trying to hide itself. Speer crosses the threshold. The door seals behind him with a pneumatic hiss. He's rehearsed this moment for weeks. The confession, the words. Now his mouth is dry. Hitler finally raises his head. The man is 56 but moves like he's 80. His skin has gone the color of old newspaper, only the eyes remain sharp, feverish, burning in that wrecked face. You've come to tell me something. Not a question. Yes, mein Führer. The silence stretches. Somewhere in the bunker, a typewriter clacks. Someone still taking dictation, still drafting orders for armies that have ceased to exist. The sound stops, starts again. The Nero Decree, Speer says quietly. Your order to destroy all infrastructure rather than let it fall to the enemy. Hitler nods, waiting. I've been sabotaging it for months. The words land in the humid air. Hitler doesn't react. His trembling hand continues its small earthquake against the table. The bridges you ordered demolished. I countermanded the charges. The factories in the Ruhr. I hid the explosives. The power stations, the waterworks, the rail yards. Speer's voice strengthens. Everything you commanded destroyed. I preserved. Hitler pulls out a chair, sits slowly, carefully, like his bones might shatter. The leather creaks. Why? Because Germany will need them. After. After what? After this ends. The ventilation fan coughs, rattles, goes silent. Now, there's only the drip of condensation and the distant typewriter. The air immediately begins to thicken. Hitler studies his own hands, the left still shaking, the right clenched to stop it. When he speaks, his voice carries no rage, just curiosity, almost academic. You know this is treason. Yes. I could have you shot. Yes. Goebbels would insist on it. So would Bormann. I know. Hitler looks at the maps again. Soviet arrows pierce from the east, American and British from the west. The arrows meet somewhere near Magdeburg. Berlin sits encircled in red pencil. Tell me what you saw. When you went above ground. Speer closes his eyes. He's been in Berlin's ruins 3 times this week, driving through rubble at night. The city is The city no longer exists as a functioning organism. No water in most districts, no electricity, no gas. The hospitals. The bridges, Hitler interrupts. Tell me about the bridges. Still standing, most of them. The demolition teams either never received the charges or, Speer pauses, or they received them and chose not to use them. They disobeyed? They understood. Hitler's laugh comes as a surprise. Short, bitter, utterly without humor. Understood what? That Germany needs infrastructure more than it needs grand gestures. The typewriter stops again. This time it doesn't restart. Footsteps in the corridor outside. Quick, military. Someone running to deliver news that probably no longer matters. You think I'm mad? Hitler says. Speer chooses his words carefully. I think the situation has evolved beyond... I'm not asking for diplomacy, Speer. You've already confessed treason. Answer honestly. Do you think I'm mad? The concrete walls seem to press closer. Speer can smell his own sweat mixing with the bunker's reek. I think you're trying to will a different reality into existence. I think you believe that if we demonstrate enough fanaticism, enough willingness to sacrifice everything, he stops. Starts again. The arithmetic doesn't change, mein Führer. Not with will, not with faith. Hitler's face doesn't change. Go on. Every report from every front says the same thing. They have more tanks, more planes, more trucks, more ammunition, more fuel. The Americans are supplying the British. The Americans are supplying the Soviets. Their factories produce in months what ours produce in years. German quality doesn't matter when they can afford to lose 10 for every one of ours. Speer's voice hardens. I've seen the intelligence. Soviet tank units equipped 50% with American vehicles. Soviet soldiers eating American rations, wearing American boots. Our enemies don't even have to produce their own supplies anymore. They just receive them. Hitler stands, walks to the map. His finger traces the red arrows. The alliance will fracture, he says, but there's no conviction in it. Stalin and Roosevelt cannot coexist. Churchill sees the Bolshevik threat. Give them time. There is no more time. The words hang in the dead air. The ventilation fan attempts to restart, a grinding whine, then dies again. Hitler turns. His eyes find Speer's. For a moment, something passes between them. Not understanding exactly. More like recognition. The architect and the failed painter, both men who'd built impossible visions and watched them collapse into rubble. You preserve the bridges, Hitler says quietly. The factories. The infrastructure. Yes. For Germany's future. Yes. Even though that future. Even though it means... He can't finish the sentence. Even though it means defeat, yes. The silence that follows stretches toward a full minute. Speer counts his own heartbeats. Somewhere above, explosions thump through the earth. Soviet artillery, close enough to rattle the overhead bulb. When Hitler speaks again, his voice has changed. The fever is gone. What remains sounds almost peaceful. You were right to do it. Speer's breath catches. The Nero decree was. Hitler pauses, searching for words. It was the logic of Gotterdammerung. If we cannot have glory, let there be ashes. He looks at his trembling hands. But you chose differently. I chose Germany. Over me. Over the Reich, over the ideology, over everything we built. Speer moves closer. I chose the nation that will exist after all of this burns away. Hitler returns to his chair, sits. The leather creaks again. He looks impossibly old in the flickering light. A man whose body has given up, but whose brain keeps firing, keeps processing, keeps trying to find the equation that makes sense of it all. Do you know what Keitel said yesterday? Hitler's voice is almost conversational. He said we should evacuate to Bavaria, regroup in the mountains, continue resistance from there. Pause. As if the Americans don't have enough bombs to flatten every mountain in Germany. They do. I know. Hitler meets Speer's eyes. I've always known, since Stalingrad, perhaps earlier, the numbers were always impossible. But if I admitted that, his hands spread. What would it mean? That millions died for arithmetic? That every mother who lost a son, every city that burned, He stops, swallows. It had to mean something. It doesn't have to mean what you wanted it to mean. No, it can mean that Germany survives, that the bridges you ordered destroyed still stand, that when this ends, there's something left to rebuild. Hitler's smile returns, that same genuine expression Speer saw earlier, terrible in its sadness. You were right, Speer. The words come slowly, each one weighted. You were always right. Speer feels his throat tighten, not with victory, with grief. About the architecture, about the productions, about preservation over destruction. Hitler's voice drops to barely a whisper. About all of it. The overhead bulb flickers, dies, comes back weaker. I won't tell the others, Hitler says into the dimness. About your sabotage, they would demand your execution, and I'm too tired for more executions. He stands with effort. Go, do whatever you think is necessary. Preserve what can be preserved. Speer finds he cannot speak. Hitler pauses at the map table. Just don't tell me about it. Let me maintain the fiction a little longer. Can you do that? Yes, mein Führer. Hitler nods. Turns back to his maps, his useless arrows, his calculations that no longer calculate anything except the speed of collapse. Speer leaves. The door hisses shut behind him. As he climbs the bunker stairs toward the surface, the ventilation fan makes one final attempt to restart. It fails. In the map room, Hitler stands alone with his trembling hands and his understanding, finally, of what arithmetic means when you fight the world's factory. The concrete walls continue to weep. The little girl's name was Maria, 10 years old. Shrapnel from a Soviet shell had peppered her left shoulder and back. Dozens of tiny metal fragments Dr. Marguerite Hammerschmidt couldn't safely extract. She worked by candlelight in what had been the number 3 gun position, now converted into a surgery ward. 30,000 people packed into the Zoo Flak Tower's corridors. The air tasted like concrete dust and unwashed humanity. Will it hurt? Maria asked. Little. Hammerschmidt threaded the suture. Her hands were steady. She'd done this 17 times today. But you're very brave. Maria's mother stood behind them, gripping her daughter's free hand, a thin woman in a coat that had once been expensive. When will the miracle weapons arrive? She asked quietly. Goebbels said. An SS officer materialized beside them. Hammerschmidt had never seen him before, one of thousands sheltering in the tower. His uniform was filthy, his eyes feverish. He'd been listening. The miracle weapons? His voice cracked. You want to know about miracle weapons? The mother flinched. I only meant, I saw them. The officer's hands shook. 2 days ago, in Lichtenberg. Soviet supply depot. American trucks, dozens of them. Studebakers, all lined up, pretty as you please, painted with Soviet stars. Hammerschmidt kept suturing. The tower's walls vibrated from a nearby explosion. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The Bolsheviks were unloading American spam, the officer continued, voice rising. American cigarettes. Lucky strike. I watched a Red Army sergeant eating from a tin labeled Kansas City, Missouri, while his men smoked Camels and drank Coca-Cola. I don't understand, the mother whispered. The Americans are feeding them. The officer's face went purple. Clothing them. Giving them trucks, food, weapons, everything. While we starve, while our children throw themselves under tanks with bombs strapped to their backs, the Americans are keeping the Bolsheviks supplied. A small crowd had gathered. Other refugees, other families pressed into the ammunition corridors. But they're enemies, someone said. America and Russia, they hate each other. The officer laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. They're all our enemies, don't you see? We believed, that their alliance would crack. That's what Goebbels promised. The communists and capitalists would turn on each other, and we'd survive in the middle. He grabbed the railing, knuckles white. But they're not fighting each other. They're sharing. The Americans make so much, so fucking much, they can give it away to Stalin without even slowing down. I saw a Soviet soldier wearing an American wristwatch, on the wrist of a man driving an American truck to kill Germans. Hammerschmidt tied off the suture, kissed Maria's forehead. All done, little one. The mother stared at the SS officer. How much are they giving them? Thousands of trucks, millions of rations. I don't know. I can't comprehend the numbers. His voice dropped to a whisper. We're not fighting two enemies. We're fighting the world's factory while that factory supplies our other enemy. The arithmetic. Jesus Christ. The arithmetic never worked. It could never work. He stumbled away, pushing through the crowd. Hammerschmidt watched him go. She'd seen that look before, in field hospitals near Stalingrad, in aid stations after Kursk, the moment when soldiers understood. Doctor? The mother's voice trembled. Is it true? Hammerschmidt cleaned her instruments with alcohol, precious, running low. I don't know about supply depots, but I know we've been eating grass soup for 3 weeks while Soviet soldiers have fresh bread. She didn't say the rest. That the Americans had produced more in 1944 than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. That a single Ford factory in Michigan outproduced the entire Reich's truck industry. She'd read the reports before communications collapsed. Read them and understood why Speer had looked so hollow in newsreels. You couldn't beat multiplication. The crowd dispersed. Families returned to their corner territories in the corridors. Someone had hung laundry from ammunition racks. Children played hopscotch on concrete floors that had held 88mm shells. Hammerschmidt treated 4 more patients before nightfall. A man with infected burns, a woman in labor, premature, probably from malnutrition, 2 children with dysentery. The tower's water supply was contaminated, but there was no choice. At 8:47 p.m., she heard the gunshot. Single crack echoing down the stairwell between floors. She knew that sound. She'd heard it in Stalingrad too, when officers realized what the numbers meant. The SS officer had chosen the northwest stairwell. He'd removed his boots first, placed them neatly side by side. His pistol lay beside him, still smoking. The bullet had entered under his chin. Hammerschmidt knelt beside the body, found his identification papers. No next of kin listed. Just a party number and an assignment to the Leibstandarte, transferred to Berlin Defense 3 weeks ago. Someone would need to move him. Record his death. She couldn't leave him on the stairs where children might find him. She noticed his pockets were empty except for one item, an American chocolate bar, Hershey's, half-eaten. The wrapper showed a GI ration label. He'd found it somewhere. Scavenged from a supply drop meant for Soviets, or traded from a prisoner, or stolen from God knew where, had eaten half, saved the rest. The wrapper was dated March 1945, produced in Pennsylvania, shipped across the Atlantic, given to Russians. Ended up in a dying German's pocket in a concrete tower while Berlin burned. That was the arithmetic. American factories made so much excess that their chocolate ended up everywhere. In Soviet hands, in German pockets, abundance so complete it leaked into every crack of the war. Hammerschmidt wrapped the officer's body in a tarp. 2 soldiers helped her carry him to the tower's morgue, a storage room already holding 37 bodies waiting for burial that would never come. She returned to her station. Maria slept fitfully, fever rising from the shrapnel wounds. Her mother sat vigil, humming something soft. Outside, the bombardment continued. Soviet artillery walking closer. Hammerschmidt knew what the SS officer had known, what Speer knew, what even Hitler finally understood in his bunker. They'd been fighting mathematics. Faith and will and German discipline against factories that ran 3 shifts, farms that grew surplus, mines that produced excess, and an economy so abundant it supplied enemies without hesitation. You couldn't beat that with courage. couldn't defeat it with better tactics or superior soldiers or miracle weapons that never came. The officer on the stairs had seen the equation and chosen. His answer, Hammerschmidt chose differently. She threaded another suture, prepared another bandage, rationed another dose of precious morphine. Someone had to survive. Someone had to remember the moment when reality became undeniable. She worked through the night while the tower shook and families huddled and Soviet shells crept closer, doing arithmetic of her own, bandages remaining, patients waiting, hours until dawn, numbers that might actually add up to something. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel spent an hour preparing his uniform. The tunic, brushed, every decoration in its precise place, the collar tabs, aligned perfectly, his boots, polished until they reflected the bare bulb in his temporary quarters. He didn't know why this mattered. The war was over. Germany had ceased to exist as anything but a geographic expression, but he didn't know what else to do with his hands. At 11:30 p.m. on May 8, 1945, a Soviet staff car collected him from his quarters in Berlin-Karlshorst. The driver said nothing. Through the window, Keitel watched ruins slide past, apartment blocks with their facades blown away, exposing rooms like dollhouses, a child's bed hanging over emptiness, wallpaper still visible in what had been someone's kitchen. The car stopped at a former German engineering school, now Soviet headquarters. Keitel climbed out, adjusted his cap, and entered. The room hit him like a physical force. Soviet marshals lined the walls, Zhukov, Rokossovsky, others whose names he'd memorized from intelligence reports he no longer needed to read. British officers in their crisp khaki, French representatives watching with barely concealed contempt, and Americans, broad-shouldered men in uniforms that somehow looked less worn than anyone else's, despite fighting across two oceans. The victors, all of them, together. An aide gestured to the table. Documents arranged in precise rows, 3 copies in Russian, English, and German. Keitel's eyes scanned the typed words without processing them. Unconditional surrender, immediate cessation of hostilities, complete disarmament. He'd seen drafts already. None of it mattered. What mattered was Marshal Zhukov's wrist. Keitel had noticed it when shaking hands. Protocol demanded this obscenity, and now he couldn't look away. An American wristwatch, Bulova, if he remembered the brand correctly. Chrome case catching the overhead lights, the kind of timepiece Germany's watch factories had stopped producing in 1943 when they converted to manufacturing artillery fuses. His gaze drifted. Another Soviet officer, conferring with an American colonel. Same watch, different brand, Hamilton, maybe. The American noticed Keitel staring and smiled slightly, then returned to his conversation. Across the room, an American general, Spatz, Keitel thought, wore something impossible, a Soviet Order of Suvorov pinned to his chest. First class, from the ribbon, one of their highest decorations, given to the man whose bombers had reduced German cities to ash. The general caught Keitel looking and nodded, as if sharing a private joke. A British liaison officer leaned against the far wall, smoking. The cigarette's sweet smell cut through the room's staleness. Chesterfield, Keitel's nose told him. American tobacco, not the sawdust and ersatz mixture German soldiers had choked down since 1942. The real thing. A French captain sat at the corner desk filling out paperwork with a pen that gleamed too brightly under the lights. Gold nib. American manufacture again. Keitel had seen enough captured supply dumps to recognize Parker quality. The captain wrote with casual ease, not hoarding ink, not rationing strokes. Field Marshal? The aide again, gesturing to the chair. Time to sign. Keitel sat. The leather creaked beneath him, the chair solid, well made. Probably German, from before. When German craftsmanship meant something besides wood and concrete panzer mock-ups to fool reconnaissance aircraft. Zhukov sat across from him. The watch caught light again. Keitel's mind replayed a moment he'd witnessed 3 days earlier, when Soviet troops first entered his headquarters. The tank commander who'd accepted his ceremonial surrender had climbed down from a T-34, offered a cigarette, American, and pointed at his vehicle with obvious pride. "Lend-Lease," the commander had said in broken German, patting the tank's armor. "Stalin tank. American engine, American radio, American food in my stomach." At the time, Keitel had dismissed it. Exaggeration. Soviet propaganda in reverse, claiming dependence to mock German defeat. But now, in this room, the arithmetic became inescapable. Every Soviet officer, American watch. The American general, Soviet medal. The British officer, American cigarette. The French captain, American pen. They weren't just allies. They'd integrated completely, sharing equipment, decorations, supplies, trading and gifting with the casualness of wealthy families exchanging Christmas presents. Abundance, recognizing abundance. He thought of the flak tower, the SS officer's rant that Dr. Hammerschmidt had mentioned in her report, the one who'd witnessed American supply dumps feeding Soviet troops. The officer had screamed about Americans arming communists. Keitel's staff had dismissed it as shell-shock delusion. The man had been exactly right. The Americans produced so much, so impossibly, obscenely much, that they could give it away to their communist rivals, while still maintaining forces across the Pacific, the Atlantic, North Africa, Italy, France. Watches and trucks and cigarettes and tanks and aircraft flowing like water from factories that never slowed, never stopped, never even strained under the load. Germany had fought that, had believed superior tactics and will could overcome it. Keitel's hand found the pen. His fingers wrapped around it. Also American manufacture, he noted distantly. Even the instrument of his surrender came from their factories. "The terms are clear?" Zhukov asked through a translator. "Clear," Keitel replied. What was clear, finally, devastatingly clear, was what they'd actually been fighting. Not the Soviet Union, not Britain or America as individual nations. They'd fought arithmetic. Pure multiplication. One factory times 1,000 factories times 3 shifts times infinite resources times the willingness to share everything with allies, even ideological enemies. The propaganda had promised miracle weapons. Goebbels had assured them the Soviet-Western alliance would fracture. Intelligence had insisted American production figures were exaggerated. All lies. Or, rather, all wishes. Germany had needed these things to be true, so it had believed them true, had structured strategy around faith instead of mathematics. Keitel signed. The pen moved across paper with smooth precision, quality ink, no skipping or blotting. His signature looked almost elegant. He moved to the second document. Russian text this time. Cyrillic letters he couldn't read. Didn't matter. He knew what it said. The same terms in different alphabets. Unconditional surrender. Third signature. German text. His own language condemning his own nation to occupation. Disarmament. Division. Across the table, Zhukov signed with his American pen, wearing his American watch, beside the American general with his Soviet medal. The British officer crushed out his American cigarette and stepped forward to add his signature. The French captain finished his paperwork and joined the line. All of them together, comfortable together, trusting each other with decorations and supplies and truth. That was the weapon Germany never faced in battle, but died fighting anyway. The alliance itself. Not fragile, not temporary, not strategic convenience. Deep integration born from one nation's ability to supply everyone without even slowing its own war machine. Keitel stood. The surrender was complete. Germany no longer existed as a military power. He should feel rage, or grief, or humiliation. Instead, he felt the peculiar numbness of someone who'd just solved a mathematical equation that had killed millions. The answer was always there. In production tables. In captured supply manifests. In the simple observation that Soviet soldiers ate American food while fighting German troops supplied with synthetic butter and sawdust bread. 212-4. American factories plus infinite resources plus Allied integration equals German defeat. No tactics could change it. No willpower could overcome it. No miracle weapons could alter basic arithmetic. The war had ended the moment it began, because one side could count and the other had chosen faith. Kaito walked from the room past the victors, his immaculate uniform suddenly feeling like costume jewelry, all show, no substance. Outside, Soviet soldiers directed traffic with American flashlights. A supply truck rumbled past, Studebaker markings visible, on its hood carrying crates stenciled in Cyrillic and English. He thought of Lieutenant Fisher at Silo Heights, emerging to find his regiment erased by 25,000 guns. Of Hitler pinning medals on children with trembling hands. Of Speer sabotaging the Nero decree to preserve what the regime wanted to destroy. Of the SS officer in the flak tower choosing a bullet after witnessing American abundance supplying Soviet advance. All of them confronting the same equation at different moments. All of them learning that faith couldn't defeat factories. The staff car waited. Keitel climbed in. Through the window, he watched a Soviet soldier check his American watch, then wave to an American MP sharing his American cigarettes with a British corporal. The mathematics of defeat, solved at last. Too late to matter, just in time to haunt him until Nuremberg's noose.